like having taught in Japan, where I'll just tell, well, we'll get going, but let me just tell you a little anecdotal story. Maybe I'll tell it later too, but to the point where, I'll never forget, I had taught all my classes for the day. And I was actually, I taught junior high, but I would take maybe one day off a week, and then I'd go to the elementary schools. And they loved me to draw these little characters that I would make. And I'm sitting drawing this character, and then these three boys come in and they rip hair off my arm and run out of the classroom. And I'm like, what was that all about? And then like an hour later, they come back with this almost like drawn in frame with my hair scotch taped to a corner. And in Japanese, it said, Patrick Sensei's hair taken from his left arm on October 13th, 1998, sign please. And they wanted me to sign it. And then the craziest thing is, 2 months later, I'm shopping in one of the local grocery stores, and a mom comes to me and she says, oh, Patrick, we just want to say how happy we are you're teaching here. And my son still has your arm hair framed now on their glass on his wall. And I'm thinking, oh my God. But, you go to 5 years or 6 years in Japan of doing that, and then you come back and I decided, okay, I want to do this as a living. So I went and I got my graduate degree in applied linguistics, and then it's the dog eat dog world in higher ed. And I thought, wow, this is so different than, because I worked with 18 different teachers in Japan, and it was such a harmonious, I had a couple in 5 years that were sort of goofy, but they were goofy with everybody. But to work with that many and build up so many neat programs, and then come here, and I just think, wow, because I remember there were times that I'd be biking across the rice paddies in Japan, and I'd literally get goosebumps because the day of teaching had been so fulfilling that I was like,
yeah,
wow,
You had that aha moment. Yeah. All right, welcome to this episode of Interview with an English Teacher. My name's Alex. I'm the founder of ESL With Purpose and Phrase It, the card game that helps you practice phrasal verbs in English. I love helping other teachers, and I am creating this interview session so I can help other teachers and help you get to know who these teachers are that love teaching English. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Mr. Patrick Randolph. So Patrick, welcome to the show.
Hello, how are you?
Good. I've been watching your YouTube channel, and I love it because you get us moving like at the beginning of your videos, and it's really helpful and a great methodology of teaching. And in fact, I've actually used one of your methods in a speech that I gave. I think it was the embodied semantics where you had to repeat the word multiple times.
Right.
And then I think you had to there was a part in it where you close your eyes and you picture where you are with the word. Right. And I think I'm missing a step here though, but because I did 2 or 3 of them, and I think there's 4. Could you tell us what that means? Like when you learn a new word in English, what are the steps that in that method that you use?
Well, that one, yeah, I'll try that, because it's kind of a sort of an offshoot of my big head to toe method. But with that particular one you're mentioning, just in a nutshell, they found out a few years ago that in the motor sensory area in the frontal cortex, whether you think about like doing an action or actually do it, that part of the brain is just being stimulated thoroughly. And so I thought, okay, if that's the case, then let me have my students do the vocabulary word and then think about it. So yeah, the parts were pronouncing it and then coming up with a gesture that corresponds to it. So if it's like come up with, it'd be like ba-ba-ba-bum or ba-ba-ba-bum. And so the thing too with the pronunciation is actually feeling the word. So now they know that, like we probably would have done the definition and the part of speech and done some example sentences. And so it's kind of pretty much in their mind what it means. And so when they're pronouncing it, I try to get them through to feel the word. So for example, something like meticulous, I remember once, I'll never forget this. I said to the students, we didn't even actually define that yet. I just said, think about how does this feel when you're saying it? I just wrote it up on the board without the definition. And I said, let's say it 3 times, but let's feel it. And we went through this meticulous. And then I looked at a student, I'll never forget. He was on the back left-hand corner of the room. And he said, it makes me sit up straight and like pay attention to things. And I thought, oh my God, right there, you've got the definition just by feeling the, and it was like the hard K and the T that they said it was kind of rigid, and yeah, it made them pay attention. And I thought, wow, okay, can they actually feel? Now you can't do this with everything. Like get around to would probably be a hard with the phrasal verb, but come up with, if you did that gesture enough, in getting the body into the verb and the preposition or the adverb or whatever you have, I think really helps. And so yeah, you're right. It's the pronunciation, gesture, and then one part of it is instead of creating the sentence and writing it down, I'll have them kind of go into the mind's eye and see the actual word taking place. Like maybe there's an accountant, meticulously filling out paperwork, and then they'll turn to their partner and say, okay, this is what I saw.
Yeah, I can see that working too, like with another phrasal verb that's more literal, like although it's a noun, it'd be like push up, or I guess you're pushing up something,
right.
or
Right.
another one might be like turn off. So you're
Right.
picturing what you're turning off in your home, maybe like a turn off a light.
Right. Uh-huh.
Yeah, phrasal verbs would be a little challenging, but I think you can still do it with them.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, because there's always the quandary. I'll hear a lot of teachers saying, well, how do you teach idioms or phrasal verbs, because they kind of go into that. And I mean, in a book that a colleague and I wrote years ago, we start off literally the first page saying, who's afraid of teaching idioms? We are. But it's a secret. I'm not really afraid. Because we put it in there to kind of have like a unity. But the truth is, from way back when I first started, I didn't teach those any different than like single words. And students, just depending on how you teach it, they'll get it right away. But I think what's beautiful about the idiom is, like, take be on cloud nine, or a breath of fresh air. It brings in so many visual things even as you're saying it. And so not all idioms, of course, are transparent like that. But, and the same thing with I think what helps the phrasal verbs is actually doing that, or getting the body involved in it. Because I always tell my students, we can't go back in time right now,
right.
but I can kind of take you back to how you learned as a 2-year-old. And you didn't learn it just in isolation, but like bicycle, maybe you're out on the lawn with your mom and dad on an autumn day, and the trees were swinging back and forth, and the leaves were falling, and so you had those colors, and you had the color of the red bicycle, and maybe you smelled your dad's cologne, and your mom had just come out of the kitchen, and she had pastry stuff on, and you had all these things going on, and then you learned to bicycle. So there's all these kind of unconscious and conscious things wrapped up into that one word. And so in class we do a lot of association things to kind of help them kind of relive how they learned vocab in their native language.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I was like picturing myself in that scene. Like our minds, I almost wonder, I think I've done this before, I don't remember if I have, but after doing an exercise like that, I think what I did with one time with students is had them walk through all that and then draw
great.
a picture. So I think if you're watching this and you're teaching young learners, I think if you walk them through basic vocabulary the way Patrick just described, and you had them draw what they just saw in their mind, that would even help them solidify the vocabulary in context even more so. So that's really helpful. So anyway, let's get to know you a little bit more, Patrick. Tell me how you got started teaching English. Why did you fall in love with it? And tell me your story when you first started teaching English.
Okay. It goes back to, I'll try to bring 3 things together, because when you asked that, I suddenly saw 3 images. One was, I was about 4 years old on a rainy day on our porch, trying to get our cats and dogs to sit down so I could teach them the alphabet. And it wasn't working.
Gotcha.
So I ended up getting my teddy bears and frogs or whatever else, stuffed frogs that I had, and put them up there. But I think I always think of that day, that was when I had because my dad was he was a university, he taught British Lit. But then he gave that up relatively early and moved the family up to the northern woods of Wisconsin. So we had a self-sufficient farm. So he was really cool. I'd see my mom and dad working in the fields during the day, and then at night I'd see dad reading a Shakespeare and mom doing her reading. And so there was this neat juxtaposition of a lot of different things going on, the physical and the mental. So those all had massive influences. And then gradually as time went on, the funny thing is, fast forwarding now to when I was 27, I was in grad school because I wanted to teach philosophy. That was it. I was going to be a philosophy instructor. I was at UW-Madison, and then I started having these South Koreans, for whatever reason, I don't know. I think the Japanese and the South Koreans, I tutored one student, and then word got out that, I don't know if it was my explanation was clear, but pretty soon I had like 15 students that I was helping. And I thought, you know what? I'm not teaching philosophy, but I'm teaching philosophy in a certain way, because the order that I'm explaining, either the grammar rules or the writing rules, it has to be kind of coherent and concise, because you can't go on forever with them, because I'll lose them. So I have to kind of be on target and use my philosophical logic and rigor. And then about that time, I was also a janitor at one of the, I was a janitor at one of the local dormitories. And that's kind of how I paid my way through my master's. And one of the buildings was a group of 10 Japanese teachers that were there just for a semester. And everybody else would kind of treat you as, the janitor, they'd say hi, but that was about it. But the Japanese were really nice, and they'd sit and chat with you, and they'd say, oh, you look like a student more than a janitor. And I'd say, well, actually, I'm a grad student here. Oh, have you ever thought of going to Japan? And I said, yeah, recently I've been tutoring a lot of students, and I've always wanted to go to Japan because my dad and mom were there way back in the 50s. And they said, oh, there's a thing called the JET program. So lo and behold, I applied, didn't get accepted right away, but was on the alternate list. And then, May 27th, 1994, I woke up at 3 a.m, and the moon was coming into the bedroom on this little hobble that I had on UW-Madison campus. And I thought, today's going to be an awesome day. I don't know what's going to happen, but the moon, if it's this cool at 3 a.m, something's good's going to happen. Well, yeah. I go to work. Classes were finished that semester, so I'm mopping the floor, and my supervisor comes in and he says, Patrick, your mom just called. You got to call home immediately. And I thought, oh my God, could it be Japan? And sure enough, mom said, yeah, call the embassy in Chicago. I think they want you. So fast forward, I get to Japan, and I teach in the public schools for 5 years, and I meet my wife from Turkey in the 5th year. So I needed to be there for 5 years. So and then it just snowballed. I realized I loved teaching English, and the beautiful thing about Japan was you're teaching in the public schools, but then they also wanted you to teach at the community center. And I loved teaching the adults too. So at one point I was teaching like from 5 years of age to like 75. Wow. And so you just got a nice breadth of students, and the passion to learn there just totally hyped you. You just got so excited that, wow, if this is teaching, I'm in,
Yeah. And there's so much dynamic too between the 5-year-old to the middle schooler to the adult. And I bet that was interesting. When you were teaching in Japan too, can you tell me a little bit more about what's the JET program? You mentioned this JET program. What's that about?
So it's changed quite a bit, I think, because I think it stands for the Japanese Exchange Teachers Program. Okay. And it's basically affiliated with the Ministry of Education in Japan. And when I was there, I can't remember, they had ALTs, which was assistant language teacher, and then CLTs, which did more things at the community center. They were more organizers, so they would set up programs, work more administrative tasks, and then there were the teachers. And you could stay up to 3 years, and then you had to go home. Okay. Now I think it's changed. I think you can stay longer. It might even be 5. But basically, they had elementary school teachers, or you could be a junior high school teacher or a high school teacher. And I had asked those Japanese teachers at UW-Madison, which one would I enjoy? And they said, well, you're kind of a lively, fun guy. I would either go with elementary or junior high, but you're also studious. Junior high is probably the best bet, because there you're going to be able to make a difference and still have fun. So I went with that. And, but the cool thing was, at the end of 3 years, I wanted to stay. I loved it, but my time was up.
Yeah.
But unbeknownst to me, the PTA at the 5 schools was writing up this petition to give to the mayor to keep me and put me on a private contract. So they wouldn't get a new teacher. They would just elongate my stay. And when they came to me and said, "Hey, would you be up for this?" I'm like, "Oh my God, yes, of course." And so I was there for 5 years, which was amazing, because then I got to see just the growth of the kids throughout that 5-year period. So instead of being there, because it was a small town of like 50,000. So at one point I had just about every kid, 5 to 15. So you couldn't go anywhere. You lived like a monk. You know, you had to walk the straight and narrow, and you couldn't do anything naughty. And so, but I was busy anyway. I was teaching 5 days a week, and I coached volleyball too. So
and volleyball
yeah,
on the side of all this English
I
teaching.
know. And that was another thing. The funny thing was with that is, they said, "Well, we'd like you to coach an activity." And I said, "Well, track and field," because I ran track from up until college. And they're like, "Oh, well, we want you to coach volleyball." And I said, "Well, but I did track. I don't know much about volleyball other than sandlot play." And they're like, "Well, we want you to coach volleyball." So I ended up going and doing it, but the girls were teaching me more than I ever taught them the first year. And then when I would rotate at these schools, they had some amazing head coaches, and I learned so much from them. So it got to the point where if the head coaches were busy, they'd let me take over and do the practice and go to the tournaments. That was, which was really fun. So, but it was time consuming, because you'd have to go to school then on Saturday and Sunday as well, because they wanted the coaches there basically 7 days a week. So Sundays were the one day where practice finished early. So right after school, I would do my shopping, my laundry, and then sleep the rest of the day, because you're just exhausted.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you're like, well, I love it, so I'm going to crash hard and then just do it again that whole week, it sounds like. Is that kind of how it went at that time?
Yeah. And at the time too, I was there. So from 27 to 32-ish, 33-ish. I did go back one more year to work at a private school, but I love the public schools the most. So I was, I didn't have a family. So everything was my school. So I was single, and I just, you'd go to school early and come home late. So it was, I don't know if you're like now, if I had a family, it'd be totally different. I'd have to set more stringent hours, because that was a time too where you didn't really want to go home to a lonely apartment. So you'd stay at school until 9 o'clock with the other teachers and eat your ramen and do your lesson planning at school, and then just go home and kind of relax before bed. But
yeah.
So, yeah.
I remember those days. I actually taught at a college in Denver Metro. And when I did that, that was before my wife and I had kids, and that's actually before we went and taught in Taiwan. And during that time, that was kind of how it was. I was working on a full-time degree, and then at night, we'd teach. I would teach at night, and I'd go home kind of late, but I'd eat late and maybe work on a few wrap-up plans in the lesson planning that I might have had to do. So I understand that routine of, okay, yeah, just going and doing so. But anyway, tell me then, after Japan, then what happened, and how did your teaching take off from there?
Okay, so yeah, just long story short, at Madison, they had this 5-year grace period where you could leave the school for 5 years and still wrap up your degree. And at that point, was all but done with the master's thesis in philosophy, and I thought I'd kick myself if I don't finish this. So I came back, spent the next year writing the thesis, graduated, and it was that point I decided, I'm going to switch from philosophy to applied linguistics. But before that, I wanted to go back to Japan and see what it was like teaching at a private institute. And so I taught in the northern part, which was great because I could still go down where I used to teach on the weekends and see, or on holidays. But it was different. I mean, it was pretty regimented, where not only did they not want you, and I could understand they didn't want you fraternizing with the students, but you couldn't talk to the other Japanese teachers that were at the school. So your life was very limited to just work, and there wasn't much socializing, and I thought, one year was enough. And plus, at that point, I realized I want to go back and get the degree in applied linguistics. So I went out to California to try to find a teaching job, and it was, do you know Kumar? What's his full name? He's a big guy in applied linguistics. He taught at the University of Alabama, Tuscaloosa, and then I think he went, I'm not sure where he's at now. I think he might be out in California. I just knew him as Kumar because he was a friend of a friend.
Oh,
and
cool.
But then later when I got into grad school, I was reading his work and I thought, oh my God, I talked to this guy. And it was actually, he and his wife, I had lunch with them, and he said, if you want to make this your life, you're going to have to go back to grad school again, because not many places are going to take you with a philosophy, a master's in philosophy to do ESL. And so I was thinking about Berkeley or UW-Madison, and my wife, we were going to get married, and I thought, Berkeley is so expensive, and Madison, like an apartment in Berkeley is going to cost $2,000. Madison's going to be $500. Plus, I grew up in Wisconsin. I thought let's just go back to Wisconsin. So that's so I got my applied linguistics degree. So I don't have a PhD. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. But I've got my MA. But at Madison, it was almost as though you did, because the rigor that you went through there. You had multiple courses on syntax, deep structure syntax, phonology, and then applied, different courses on applied and general linguistics, conversation analysis. So people who I've spoken to that have their PhD, they would say, it seems like you went through the PhD program, because those are the same classes that I took. And on top of that, at the end of your study, you go through this 8-hour comprehensive exam. And I'll never forget, the word was 50 would pass and 50 would fail, no matter what. And the group that was taking it that fall in 2006, I'll never forget, it was January 4th, 2006. I mean, everything kind of merged on that day. And I thought, okay, if 50% fail this, we can't afford it, because everybody that I was taking it with, we wanted to get back in the classroom and teach. And so we started studying for that exam on June 1st, prior. And we would meet twice a week, because you had, not only did you have to review, because it was an 8-hour exam with 9 subjects, and you could drop one subject. You couldn't drop syntax or phonology, but you could drop like some type of admin in linguistics, or one of the kind of side studies. But the core ones you had to take. And so we would meet 2 or 3 times a week. And in addition to that, you had a reading list. You had like 90 books back then. I'm not sure if they still have, but you had 90 books you had to read in addition to that. So we divided that up, outlined it, and we just had this small study group. And for the first time in their history, everybody passed that fall, or that winter. And so it was a huge, and then they had their levels, like, okay, you passed, but we don't want to see you anymore, or you passed and we want you in the program. And then there was high pass, where you could immediately start the PhD program.
Wow.
But and at that point, I mean, they asked me to stay for the PhD, and I kind of wanted to do it, but on the other hand, I wanted to get back in the classroom and start teaching. And
because
so
that's where your heart is, it sounds like.
Right,
like you want to go right back in front of students and just be there to help them go from here to here with their English.
Exactly.
Right.
Right.
So
yeah.
That's
so then,
so cool.
And after that was, just working at different schools and setting up, in some schools like in Southern Illinois, I helped set up a creative writing program for the ESL Institute. And then the other schools, so at this point, I've taught at University of Wisconsin, La Crosse, University of Southern Illinois, Carbondale, and then Western Michigan, Kalamazoo, and then University of Nebraska at Lincoln.
Nice.
So,
and how long were you at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln?
So that was from 2015 to 19.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Cool. So fairly recent.
Right.
That's great. And then in that role, what was your main job there?
Main job, I taught. So I taught in 3 different. They had 3 different categories. They had the traditional IEP, intensive English program, and then they had bridge classes. So those would be like, let's say you had a student from Taiwan that was already majoring in finance, but they needed to kind of hone their writing skills. So they'd take writing class and maybe a reading class, and then they'd have their 2 other classes. And then the classes that I started pretty much teaching after 2016 were in the 3rd category, and those were students that were conditionally admitted to UNL, and they're already either grad students or undergrad. And I was doing mainly the communication skills, integrated skills classes, or the writing. So it was like freshman comp. And I loved the 150 class because you could do creative writing and academic writing and expository. It was a nice mix of different things.
Yeah.
But I loved I loved those classes because you were teaching at such a high level and pushing them even to a higher level. And so those moments where they really got the confidence level, or they were willing to take that chance and make a mistake that ended up, really developing their writing, were those moments that you really lived for.
Nice. And so from that applied linguistics degree that you ended up getting all the way to all of your years of experience teaching, that's when you started forming these methods, right? Like your head to toe method. And because I can see where for an intensive English program, or like a university that's looking for a bridge pathways curriculum, that would help tremendously, having some of those academic vocabulary words taught the way you did it. I think that would really help solidify it for students.
Right. Yeah, because I think one of the, like the head to toe and the methods that I developed, it was kind of nothing that was ever consciously thought of and then say, okay, I'm going to do this and put this into effect. It was something where I'd be in the classroom and I'd think, how did I learn that word in Japanese? Oh my gosh, I wonder if that would work here. And then I would use it at that moment, like totally spontaneous. And then, so that might be back in like, say, 2004 or whatever. And then by 2007, I had honed it into a technique and then started writing about it and getting other people to do it. But it was always like for example, there's a phrase, do you know the Japanese phrase achikochi?
Heard it. I don't know what that means.
Okay, like here and there,
okay, yeah.
Yeah. So there was a day I was in the parking lot and I was heading off to another school, and one of the people said, "Oh, kyo wa Pato-chan wa achikochi desu ne." And I said, "Oh, what is?" And I looked. I didn't say, "What does that mean?" Because most of the people there didn't speak much English in the tiny little town. And I had that look on my face, like, "What did you just say?" And she said, and then she kind of explained it. But what I'm getting to is, her name was Goshima-san. And I'll never forget her face the moment she explained it to me. So one of the parts of this head to toe method is when they're learning a word, who does it remind you of? What family member or friend? And so they, and so many words, like maybe my mind works differently, but there's so many Japanese words in my head, or moments that I learned that I know the student or the teacher or the fish seller who taught me the word. And so my students really liked that because all these, especially these academic words, they're so abstract, and if we can pull them down to something that's tangible or concrete, they'll learn them like that,
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. Because when I lived in Taiwan and I had to learn a new word, it was like about sugar, learning the word, a little bit. Do you want a lot of sugar or a little bit? And they assume,
Okay.
well, he's a Wagoran, he's an American foreigner. He's gonna like sugar because Americans like sugar. That was like the cultural understanding, which is true. Americans have a ton of sugar and everything. But that being said, I didn't want that much sugar in my drink. And he said, "Wei tang ma." I'm like, yeah, sure. And he's like, and he was asking me, do you want more sugar, or do you, how much is this enough? A little or a lot? And I'm like, sure, yes, sure. Like learning. And then later I learned to say "idiendian," which means a little bit. So
Okay.
Next time I ordered sugar, because when he gave it to me, I'm like, holy cow, this thing just tastes like syrupy water. I mean, it was so sugary. And I'm like, okay, next time I'm going to learn the word for a little bit of sugar. And I did. And that context, like, I will never forget that vocabulary word now because of that. And, English languages are learned the same way. So Speaking of languages, what other languages do you know, Patrick?
By the way, before I want to say thank you for your chocolate chip cookie video. We love that one.
Oh, you watched that? Thanks.
I like the dancing around in the kitchen.
Yeah, I actually had my daughter actually help film that for me.
Oh, neat.
Like YouTube has this thing where I can't do a video if it has kids in it. I
Okay.
have to like, well, I can do it, but I have to like set certain settings on it. So it's like,
Okay.
well, this is going to be a for kids and families video. And then when
Okay.
I do some other videos, I have to like check it off. Anyway, I'm glad I helped you. And bake cookies. If you guys are watching and you want to make cookies, check out my cookie making video.
Cookie video.
Also, Patrick, for you, tell me about languages, and then tell us
Mhm.
about your YouTube channel, and then maybe some writing or publications that you've done. I'd love to hear about that too. So
Okay.
three things. Do you know other languages, and
Uh-huh.
your publications you've done, and then tell us about your YouTube channel. Let's go
Okay.
with that. Let's
Sounds
do
good.
that.
Yeah. So languages. So as an undergrad, I studied philosophy, and then my other major was Spanish language and lit. So I started off with the Spanish, which was great because my job right after college, I worked on the south side of Chicago at a recycling center, and I I just wanted to work there, but my goofy boss said, "Oh, I want you to manage the yard." And I'm like, "Oh, great! I'm 22, and everybody else in the yard is like 45 or 50." But what really worked, it was beautiful because there were a lot of Brazilians there, and they were starting to learn English but hadn't quite gotten it yet. And the boss was great. He said, when they get their English down, I'm going to give them a raise because then they can communicate with more of the people that are coming in. And so I was
Yes.
teaching them English. I mean, I taught that for free because they were so sweet. And these guys were waking up, coming into the yard with me at 6 a.m, and then I was going home to feed my cat. 22-year-old kid. They were going off to the schools on the north side of Chicago to learn English. And so I thought, I can teach you the same thing. It's free up there. It's free in my apartment. Let's just do it. And you don't have to be traveling all over because it takes 1 hour to get up, and you got to come in the yard with me at 6 a.m. But a lot of the explanation I did it in Spanish, and they totally got it in their Portuguese. And so that was a great I thought, okay, great. My 4 years at Beloit College in Southern Wisconsin did me good because I love philosophy and I was able to use my Spanish.
There you go.
and then the Japanese was, I knew I was going to go teach in Japan. I was studying philosophy. I didn't have time to take Japanese classes, but the kids that I was tutoring, again, I did that. I knocked myself in the head, but I did that for all free. Teaching the Taiwanese and the South Koreans and the Japanese. But I learned so much Japanese that it was, because we do a swap. We do Japanese and English.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got to Japan, my Japanese was still poor. I mean, I only knew like 50 of the kanji, the characters, and then I knew the hiragana and katakana, but I couldn't speak that well. I could do an introductory session about me that I had memorized, but that was about it.
Yeah.
So your story about sugar reminded me of, I would go to the store and I couldn't read much of the characters. So I thought, okay, is this sugar or salt? And you couldn't smell it through the plastic. So I think I learned a lot of the Japanese by asking so many questions. I just find a housewife who was going through the aisles and say, I knew Sato and Shoyu. And so I said, is this Sato or Shoyu? And she'd point to, and then I'd try to remember the little kanji character for it. But so but there you're living in Japan, and so you're learning so much. I mean, every day, and you've got to as well. And then my wife is Turkish, and so now I'm trying to take on the Turkish language, which is it's beautiful and very harmonious. But they've got this thing called vowel harmony, which is a little hard to wrap my brain around. But it's getting there. So
how did you meet your wife then? If so, she's Turkish then, right? In her background. So how did you guys get together?
That was the coolest thing about Japan is on September 23, 1998, around 2:00 in the afternoon.
You remember?
It was really cool because a friend from Wisconsin who was teaching in the same province in Japan called me up, and it was a holiday. It was the autumn equinox, and they didn't have school there on the autumn equinox. And he said, "Hey, let's go to the Turkish Cultural Village." And I said, "Oh, I've heard about that place." So in that prefecture, they had a Russian, Spanish, and a Turkish cultural village, which was be about the size of 2 mega Walmarts or 2 big Targets. And it was basically, they had like the Turkish one, they had a photography museum, place that you could do different Turkish arts, and then they had like a dance routine every couple of hours, and then they had like a restaurant and like a little mini covered bazaar. So my wife had studied Japanese in Istanbul, and her teacher said, hey, how would you like to go to Japan for 6 months and kind of be a liaison with Turkish and Japanese culture, and then work at this cultural village. And so that day that we were going up there, my wife was taking tickets. And the moment I saw her big brown eyes and a big smile, and I thought, whoa.
Nice.
And so the rest was history. She actually that day, the funny thing was, I thought, does she speak English? And I don't speak Turkish. So our first conversation was in Japanese.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Cool. And then just you continue to get together after that. So did you then find out in Japanese? You had to ask her, do you know English? Did she like start talking then too?
What happened was, it was so funny because my friends were like, come on, we've got to go. And so I wanted to chat with her more. And so our 2-hour tour of the thing, I kept thinking, I wonder if the turnstile girl is still going to be there. And sure enough, she was. And so we chatted more, but then they're like, come on, we got to take you to the train station. Cause they drove there, but they were going to drop me off at the train station and I was going to go home. And I got halfway home and I thought, Patrick, you are the world's biggest idiot. I didn't get her name, her telephone number, or anything. And so the next day at school, I had Mr. Suzuki, he was the civics teacher. And I said, hey, can you call the Turkish Cultural Village and get the name, address, and telephone number of the girl working the turnstile from 12 to 2 yesterday? He said, yeah, we can do that. So when I got home that day, actually, I wrote her a letter, and I got some postcards from Wisconsin and a bunch of stuff together and made a little packet. And then after I got her address, I sent it off that next day. And so this was back, before email, really. I mean, there was email at that time, but it wasn't working in those tiny towns.
No, the network connections were not good at that time.
I remember I got an account and then I could never use it because but so we would just write letters and then call. But then she went back to Turkey in February, and so I thought my world had, because we didn't meet after that day in September. We just emailed or wrote letters and talked on the phone. But when she got back, she sent me a birthday card, and I thought, wow, she remembered my birthday. How did she remember that? So we continued corresponding for the next 4 years.
Wow.
And then when I was back in the States, I'll never forget this because I wrote her a handwritten letter saying, it's been 4 years. I think we should meet somewhere on the globe. And now we had email, and I posted that. She didn't receive the letter yet. And then the next email that afternoon, she said, it's been 4 years. I think we should meet again. So yeah, that was.
Wow. That's like a You've Got Mail story, kind of. I mean, really, if you've ever seen the movie You've Got Mail, have you seen it?
Oh, yeah.
With Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, right?
Yeah, Meg Ryan. Yeah, You've Got Mail. It's one of my. It's a funny romantic comedy.
Oh, yeah.
You guys are like living in a Hollywood movie almost. So like, it's a love story.
Yeah.
It's really cool. Yeah. And so then from that point on, you taught, and then now, I mean, in 2020 this year, I mean, you taught at the University of Nebraska, and then here we are later. COVID hits all these English teachers. Teachers worldwide, schools are shutting down everywhere. I mean, my own business was affected. I'm like, my phrases sales were like this, and they started to go like this because schools were closing down, and I had a lot of like schools and teachers buying my product. I still have a few, but like it hit a lot of teachers, and like from 2019 to 2020, there was kind of some big disruptions happening in education. And so tell me a little bit how you've kind of experienced that from 2019 to 2020 till now as we're recording this. What's going on for you?
Yeah. So in 2019, I lost my job. And so thank God for my wife and her support and my little one's support. I didn't have a job, but this came out. So it was new ways in teaching with creative writing. My buddy, Mr. Rupert and I. So it's really cool. It's 97 different poetry and prose and dialogue and creative writing projects. But we were so excited to get it. And I wasn't working, so I was putting all the time in to get the editing and then sending it off to the publishers. But with COVID, each year at TESOL, that's your big boom. So, you're going to sell hundreds of these and it's going to be a bestseller, and we're so excited. And then COVID hits, there's no TESOL convention. And so nobody knows about the book. And so they did have some, like special teacher sales on the TESOL Press website, but that's a perfect example of spending 4 years just working on, because it's the 97 different lessons are from people around the world. Joseph and I contributed about 10, and then it's people from Colorado, California, New York, Spain, Turkey, France, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. So people from around the world. So we were editing those, but you put your blood, sweat, and tears into something for 4 years, and then oh yeah, that convention, it's gonna take off, and then there's no convention.
Yeah.
Then, and Denver's such a cool place because that convention center is, you can get anywhere you want within 2 minutes, I swear. So I thought, well, that's going to be an awesome venue, and then it didn't happen, so.
And what you're referring to is COTESOL, Colorado Teachers of English. Yeah, I think there's one in there's one in Arizona, a TESOL conference. I know there's another. So if you're watching this, you're an English teacher and you go to these conferences, you probably know what we're talking about. If you're not an English teacher, you're like, what letters are you saying? They're just basically conferences that people go to. And I know there's some in the Carolinas. There's like a Carolina TESOL group. I think, California probably has some, and the Northeast has a few. But yeah, there's lots of educator conferences. And since people aren't meeting at conferences, it's like, well, we got to go online now. So here we are. And I bet that's been a challenge. Your book, though, can people buy it like digitally too? Or, I mean, they could just order it, right? Can people order your book somewhere?
Yeah. I mean, it's TESOL Press is that's where the main one is.
Oh, so if people go to, where do they have to go? Just the TESOL website?
So TESOL International, and then there'll be, so it's got TESOL Convention, TESOL Bookstore. So if you just go to that and then type in Patrick P. Randolph, the book on idioms and the book on creative writing will pop right up.
Awesome. I'll put a link at the bottom of this video too, if you're watching this. If you want that book that he just mentioned, the creative writing book, would that be helpful too for young learners, or like what levels is that for? Like academic writing, or what,
right.
What would that be best applied for?
I mean, that's why what we tried to do is we tried to get it so that the activities in there, so there are 97 activities, but it's almost infinite in a way, because you can take any one of those and teach at a basic level or advanced level. So how the book is organized is, so each unit, so there's the poetry unit, prose, dialogue, and then special projects. So we start off each section from low basic to advanced, but we make that little caveat in an introduction saying, just because it's low and intermediate, you can just tweak that, turn it into an advanced, or take the advanced one and kind of lower it down for the basic. So it's organized from basic to advanced, but each one of those could actually be tweaked for whatever level that you're really teaching at. And the nice thing about it is, I'll open up to a page here. So each, let me just I'll use the poetry one, because that way you can see it on the screen. So like this one here, each section ends with a student or teacher example.
Oh, so, nice.
Yeah. So you've got, and they're real short. Each one is, so this one's making rain from rain sticks to sound poetry. So
cool.
You've got the little explanation why to do it. And then all of this is the procedure, and then caveats and options, more reading, and then the student or teacher example. So nice. Each one of those has something that a teacher can look at and say, okay, that's what the poem kind of we're shooting for. This is what the little fable or the little dialogue that we're trying to make should look like, or something similar to it. Of course, you're going to vary it, but
yeah. And I know a lot of teachers too in different states and different countries. If you're watching this from other countries, you probably have different standards of what you have to meet as far as like a creative writing objective. So that might help with that too. Some of those objectives they have to meet for their school districts or whatever.
Right.
So that's pretty cool.
One of the big, and it's a hard sell, because I've tried to do, because even back in Japan, I'll just 3 quick little stories about the creative writing. So I think my first year there, I saw the students just producing really neat things on the sentence level. And I asked a couple of the teachers, I said, hey, could we kind of did just sort of brushed up against a poetry unit. And I said, can we run with this? And I'll sponsor a citywide poetry contest. So all the kids, first, second, and third year junior high school students will write poetry. And they said, "Oh, Patrick, you're always you're always pushing a little too much with these ideas. Our students can't write poetry in Japanese, let alone English." And I said, "Okay, let me just come at it this way. Can we try it this year? And if it doesn't fly, I'll let it go. But if we have something there, we might want to consider making this a part of the curriculum."
Yeah.
He wrote absolutely amazing poetry. And in fact, one of the books I had published in Japan, it's filled with that student poetry. So
Wow.
it was the students, and I had some students that did not like English at all, and they worked on the poems, and some of them got their poems accepted into the book, and they totally changed. I mean, they were ready to go on to college and study English, just a tiny little thing like that.
Yeah.
But and then the second thing is, I saw when I was teaching in Wisconsin, it was an intermediate group, and we were really struggling with paragraphs. And I had the template, and my favorite example was, I do this, for example, because my uncle does it, and conclusion. And so there was no development, and their level when they came in was a little low as it was. And I asked the director there, I said, this is a semester-long class. Do you mind if I take a week off and do some creative writing and then jump back on to the scheduled paragraph? And she said, "Yeah, knock yourself out. You've got, a week and a half of kind of space that you can wiggle with." And so we did a little bit of poetry, but mainly just like flash fiction, 100-word short stories or 200-word short stories. And they're writing this from within. And that was my first key, is I was giving them the topic for the paragraphs, but with the creative writing, I was just giving the theme, and they were coming up with the story. And so their development was almost natural. And I thought, wow, they're writing some really good stuff here. Why are the paragraphs look like this and their creative writing is looking like this? So after I kind of pushed it into a week and a half instead of just the week, and we came back, and I said, "Okay, let's just pick up where we left off." And the development was so much better. And I took them to the director, and I said, "Look what they've done with this week where we're doing creative writing." She said, "You might have something there. Continue doing it and continue adding creative writing." Well, it became such a hit at UW La Crosse that the director let me do kind of a capstone creative writing class when they left the program. So, and the students that did that, they wrote remarkably well. And so then when we got to Southern Illinois, as one of the kind of little, how can I use it? Negotiation, on the negotiation table for the job, I said, I said, "Would you be open to a creative writing class or program?" And the director there said, "We've never had anything, but I like that idea. And if we did, you'd be in charge of it." And I said, "Okay, then we're coming down there." And good to her word, actually, it was a group of students from Taiwan, and they were there just for like 4 weeks. And my director said, "Hey, why don't you try your creative writing seminar out on this special group and see how they react to it and like it. And if it works, we'll implement it into the program." And so that's how that took off. We actually, they loved it so much. And what was the cool thing was the students from Taiwan were coming from civil engineering, physics, mechanical engineering, nobody in English department at all.
All these math and science degrees.
Right. And yet they were writing these beautiful poems and short story pieces. And they loved it. They just talked so much about the class that the director said, "Okay, I'll allow you to set up a class here." And it was kind of perfect timing because students at level 4 there, which was kind of high intermediate, were having a hard time moving to level 5. So we gutted the level 4 out and turned it into a creative writing seminar. It was an 8-week program. So 8 weeks and then another 8 weeks. So after we, so at that point, pre-creative writing, about 50% were passing, but their skills were still a little dodgy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
After we implemented the creative writing, 85 to 90% of the kids were moving on, and their level was so much higher. That's how it sold. I mean, the test scores after the creative writing, the director was like, "Okay, I'm in. Let's implement it." and put it in the program.
Oh
So
my gosh, that's so cool. Patrick, that is I just read a book recently by Dan Heath called
hmm.
Upstream, and it
Oh,
talks about
it's
solving.
called Upstream.
Yeah, it's called Upstream.
Hmm.
It's about, I'll put a link in the description here too for that book. It's called Upstream, but it's about and it just got published this year in
Hmm.
2020, and it's about solving problems before they even happen. So it
Hmm.
sounds like what you did is you solved the massive problem of these students in these pathway courses trying to excel their English that are in these like rigid math science programs where they're like, well, they just got to memorize enough English to, pass whatever test. It sounds like you kind of solved the problem for them by throwing in that creative writing in a contextual way that really got them to score higher, like, and
Right.
actually like the language more.
Yeah.
Am I right in that? I mean, does it sound?
Yeah, the neat thing was, um, they went from, because you teach, right? Because I got into the flow of doing a lot more writing classes than anything else, mainly because I loved it so much. It's more intensive because you're doing a lot more grading, but you get a lot more window into the student's life because you get to see their journals or whatever, and you can make a lot of really neat contact. But the big thing was, teaching writing is really like going to the, not, dentists are wonderful, but going to the dentist and getting a tooth pulled is not the, it's not like heaven.
Yeah.
And so, as a writing teacher, you felt like you're a dentist in so many cases that, oh God, they're going to come into your classroom and, pull out their molars. So you'd come in and you'd try to, be as, energetic and exciting as possible. But that creative writing was just, because I guess the key is, I'm not, let me back up and say, so in one class, we were giving students from Saudi, for example, topics that they were giving them were, write an essay on the Mexican-US border issues. Okay, these kids had just gotten off the plane from Riyadh or Medina in Saudi Arabia. They don't know American culture that well. They're trying to wrap their brain around English. And now you're asking them to write on topics that even a basic American gonna have to do a decent amount of research to write something good on it. And I told my colleagues, I said, aren't these topics a little, don't we have to bring them, why not have them talk about something that they've dealt with in their life? Well, yeah,
Yeah.
we can look at that maybe next 8 weeks, but right now let's just stick with the curriculum and give them the U.S. border issues and this and that and the other thing. So when we did that creative writing and they're pulling all 90% of what's on the page from their personal life, they weren't fighting against this topic issue, and they were, naturally, they're coming up to you saying, okay, how would what words could I use to describe this? Here's the situation in my head. And so a lot of it's coming from them now. And I think they really got infected with the creative writing bug because they saw that. And then when they produced it, and we'd have other students reading their work as kind of the workshop, and they're listening to their own work being read, and some of the work was pretty darn good. They're like, wow, I can actually write, and so, and then you start honing the, the grammar and the syntax and stuff. But at least you've got that interest now in the writing. Writing is no longer the dentist. It's more like going to maybe the orthodontics and just getting your braces tweaked,
Right. And for someone from that background and culture that speaks Arabic as a first language, it is a very poetic language. And so for them to have to be like, well, English, it's not that poetic, to make English more poetic for them. I bet that was a fun stretch too, to see.
Oh yeah.
And I bet that helped them, like, because I know if you're a teacher watching this too, whatever country you're teaching in, you'll have this deer in the headlights look from your students when you teach something or present new information. They're just like, what? This sounds like a great way to apply, a way to get them out of that deer in the headlights moment to where they're actually taking ownership of the language themselves and wanting to do it. Is that kind of how what you saw happen too? They got more excited about the project and things.
Yeah. Because anytime, like you just said, when you're bringing their culture in too, with the poetry and the stories, just the involvement. Yeah, the involvement in the class, and it was more of I guess the ownership. They had a lot more ownership of the topics and what they were writing about.
Yeah, I think that's key. You hit on something too when you introduce that even to the other university. They're like, well, let's test it and see. And it's like you gave ownership to these math PhD, level other topic disciplines, the way they think. You just gave them ownership of something. And I think that if you're an engineer, engineers like to own their little projects. And so that's kind of fun. You kind of gave them a ownership project. And I think that's even in businesses worldwide, that's a principle of ownership. You give somebody a little bit of ownership. There's an idiom in English. We say, you teach a person, you give them a fish, they'll keep needing you to give them a fish. But if you teach them how to fish, they will not go hungry. They'll know how to, they won't depend on you anymore. They'll know the language better. So that's kind of a neat story that you guys have put together in that creative writing book. And I know you've written some other things too, haven't you, Patrick? Some other publications.
There's the this was the one that I did with Paul McFerrin. It's Cat Got Your Tongue. It's all about idioms.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So it's the best way, like best practices on how to teach idioms. And we do a little bit, there's a chapter on the brain and there on how they think idioms are acquired. And then what's neat about this too is we have one full chapter that's like 30 some pages, and it's 13 different lesson plans. So it's a nice theory practice book. And then just articles, I've been, I remember that was one thing that throughout the years, teachers would come up to me and say, you're always writing articles. Don't you think that takes time away from the classroom? And doesn't that impede your teaching? And I said, does presenting at a conference impede your teaching? No, it makes you better because you present it and then people say, oh, that's great, but have you tried this? And you think, oh, wow, I'm going to add that in. And then the same thing with writing it. I think the articles always come back to the classroom because you'll write it and then you'll get feedback from, excuse me, either the editor or people that are reading your work. Yeah. And then when you work on the next piece, it's probably better, but you're taking what you're writing and bringing it back in the classroom for your students. Because usually the pieces that I write are procedural. So kind of like, here's the neuroscience, cognitive psychology behind it. This is why I do it and why it works. And then I'll go into the actual method that the teachers can use. So,
nice. So if you're like an academic trying to grow in your skill set, you can take some of this and put it towards that. But if you're just a practical English teacher, like I've got to teach this to these students this semester, what do I teach? You've got a whole curriculum almost just like whipped out. That's a phrasal verb, whipped out or organized and planned for you. That's really interesting. Where can I get the Cat Got Your Tongue? Is that online too?
Yeah, that's all. I mean, I think Amazon has these now too, but that's also a TESOL Press one.
Okay.
Yeah, I can send the link, or you can put that under.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Video. Yeah.
Cool.
So and the nice thing about the Cat Got Your Tongue, that came out in 2014, so the price is down considerably. We, as the author, you want the price to be low so that teachers can buy it, so that they can use it. But because we didn't get any royalties off the idiom book, we got an honorarium that was pretty tiny. And so our joy now is in people using the book, but it's been out there so long now, I think it's down to like $30. And
wow.
So, and
yeah, because some academic books, they're up into the $40, $50 or $60 range, aren't they?
Yeah, when this came out, it was like $52, and my colleague Paul McFerrin and I were like, who's going to buy a $52 book as an ESL teacher,
Yeah.
But
you got to get the administration and the whole school university to buy it in bulk for all their teachers to make it worthwhile. Yeah, that makes sense. But it's great that you provide these resources for teachers. I think, is there a blog or a website you have, or a channel, a YouTube channel that people can go to learn more about you?
Yeah. Your third question was
yes. As teachers, we kind of derailed and got really, into our topics, I think, and then we have to come back.
We always get back.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, if the viewers just go to Patrick T. Randolph, Randolph, in YouTube, then my channel will pop up. And so, however, I think there might be two. No, I think there's another Patrick T. Randolph. He's a really cool black minister someplace in Texas. Because when you Google, the two of us pop up. But I think his channel is different. So, so if you just do mine, then you're going to see a lot of the videos are that we're putting together are creative teaching and learning with Patrick and Gable, our cat.
Yeah.
So we've only got 17 or 16 videos now, but pretty wide range, everything from like adverb placement and positioning to actually I've now with this online world, um, with a lot of the conferences going virtual, my wife, I mean, she's sort of the brains behind the whole YouTube, because I do I write the script and talk, and then she does the filming and then the editing, and
Uh-huh.
I look at her, I say, how do you even do that? Because she's like splicing things together and putting in the
Yeah.
music, and I'm like, wow, okay. um, so um, we've got, actually, I think of the 16, and we're going to do more. We're going to continue. We'll probably do like a couple a month, but there's a lot of conference presentations on the site too. So I would think, I was going to ask you about this, I would think that directors in ESL institutes could actually have their faculty watch these YouTube videos and get professional development credit for it. Because
Absolutely.
some of them that I've got up there are like the JALT, the Japanese Association for Language Teaching, Colorado TESOL, Minnesota TESOL, Mid TESOL, Wisconsin TESOL, Minnesota TESOL, and Big TESOL. So a lot of the videos are ones that I taped for the virtual, and then after I did it at the conference, we'd post them up on the YouTube. So
Yeah.
there's really no difference in watching it on the YouTube and then clicking on the site that's usually temporary, because the conference will put a video up temporarily and then pull it down. So
Yeah. And academic, you're kind of speaking a little bit at an academic level too in some ways, and like your principles that can also be brought down to the practical. So I can definitely see how your videos and I've even watched some of your practicums and your training videos that you put together here on YouTube. Some of those I think, yeah, definitely could count as professional development hours, because you're talking about methodologies of teaching, how to teach better, how does language work. I mean, that to me, if you're watching this and you're a director of a university, or you're trying to get your team and staff to do professional development hours, or you're just a teacher that's like, I need to find more professional development hour material out there. Yeah, going online to Patrick's website, his YouTube channel, I think will help you get some of those hours fulfilled. You can just probably fill it out on a piece of paper, or type it up, and send it to your boss, or your team, and say, hey, watch these videos. They'll help you with your professional development hours. So that's cool. That's a great idea. I think that would help a lot, because you've published different academic papers and even academic books here for teaching. So
right.
that's really helpful.
Another website that you could have the viewers go to, and I don't know the exact I can send the URL to you later, but it's called, are you familiar with the site academia.edu?
I've heard of it. I think I've been there a few times on a couple topics. Yeah.
Okay.
Academia.edu. I'll put a link below as well for that.
Okay. Yeah, because that's a great, I mean, I think when I first started a few years ago, I don't know how many millions were on it, but now it's just, it's almost like a huge free library. Anything from using drama in the classroom to quantum physics papers are up there, and it's all free. You just, I think you can either use your Google ID or your Facebook ID and set up setting up your password and username. It's all free.
Okay.
You can download the articles for free. And I haven't put a lot of mine, because you have to go, like what you get published, you've got to go back and ask the editor, can I put this article on my academia site? And most of them have said yes. So it's a matter of just taking the time and contacting them. So I only have about 23 articles up there, and I'll try to get the more of them up later. But I've got a variety there too: vocab teaching, poetry readathons,
fun.
Using synesthesia, that crisscrossing of senses, like tasting smells and smelling tastes and tasting colors. So I use that synesthesia as an aspect to teach vocabulary. And so there's an article on that I have. So a bunch of different things.
Neat. So if you're a teacher watching this, and even if English is not your native language, and you're a teacher in your country teaching English, his stuff will really help you apply different things for helping you with your students, wherever you're teaching, online or in a classroom setting. All right. Well, thanks, Patrick. I really appreciate your time. This has been so cool, this interview. So people, if you want to watch more and learn about Patrick, I'll leave the link below for his YouTube channel. Again, it's Patrick and Gable is their channel. It's Patrick T. Randolph. But I'll provide a link here. You can go to his channel and some of the books he mentioned. We can talk about that. But thanks again, Patrick, for joining Interview with an English Teacher. I hope this helped you. And if you're an English teacher, I may be reaching out to you in the future. to record an interview with you to hear your story as well. So thanks again, and we'll see you all in a future lesson.
Okay. Thank you.